Welcome back to another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. David Lake, joined as always by Gabby Urrutia, a Gabby that's playing hurt this podcast. Just want to say that on the front side here. Gabby's dealing with lost voice, so he's going to gut it out a little bit here and there. If it sounds like he's struggling, I'll jump in. But Gabby's here, ready to preview this SMU game with me. Before we dive into things, want to highlight two of our sponsors, Canes Connection. That, of course, is Miami's collective. As we're kind of turning the page from October to November, getting close to signing day here, Miami is generating some momentum on the recruiting trail this week with the addition of Milan Paris, four-star wide receiver, and Keyshawn Stansel, a flip from Clemson, so defensive tackle. So they are getting it done here on the recruiting trail, and we'll see if they can keep that momentum going as they look to make a push for a top 10 class. Of course, one way to help Miami in those efforts is go support the guys at Canes Connection. That's Miami's collective in the NIL space, canesconnection.com. Also, our guy, Nick Musarino, the Musarino Law Group. If you've been injured in a slip and fall, boating accident, trucking accident, Uber or Lyft accident, any type of car accident, Nick Musarino is the personal injury attorney I would go to. He's the personal injury attorney you should go to. Massive Canes fan as well. But if you have anything you want to talk to him about, hit him up at 561-960-9870 or visit his website at flinjury.law. That information is going to be in the show notes. All right, Gabby, let's dive into the preview here. We got Miami, who's now ranked number 10, visiting SMU at Gerald J. Ford Stadium in the Dallas area. It's a 12 p.m. Eastern time kick, 11 a.m. local time kick. This game will be televised on ESPN. Let's start, as we always do, with some injury talk, just as well as we can talk about it. Again, the official injury report, take that with a grain of salt as well, but that'll be released later, after this podcast is published. But I guess, obviously the guy to watch, I think, is still defensive end Akeem Mesidor, dealing with some sort of lower extremity deal. And Gabby, right now, I would probably classify him as questionable. Honestly, still maybe even questionable to doubtful. I think he is making progress, compared to last week. But personally, I think his availability is going to come down to the wire. So we'll see if, how that goes with how he feels. And, we'll see on the injury report that comes out, I think it's 2 hours before kickoff, how he's looking then. As it relates to SMU, they have a laundry list of injuries, and frankly, they're kind of a banged up team in general, especially on offense. And it is kind of one of the storylines for, their team this week and also just in general in recent weeks and moving forward as this season progresses. How do they navigate things as a team that's really, playing through some injuries? First off is quarterback Kevin Jennings. He's clearly playing hurt. So SMU's coming off a 13-12 loss at Wake Forest, and you can tell he just doesn't look right. And he's dealing with a left ankle injury that I believe he aggravated against Stanford. He re-aggravated it pretty bad against Clemson, and then did it last week again against Wake Forest. He's just not accurate like he normally is. He's not as mobile as he normally is. And frankly, like when you watch him on some plays, he's clearly, shying away from contact. So he's playing hurt. That's obviously a big deal. I think the other guy to notice or keep an eye on too, in terms of like injury reports and availability, is defensive end Cam Robinson. Rhett Lashley classified him as maybe questionable here at his Monday press conference or Tuesday press conference. Um, he is their best defensive end. He looks the part. He's kind of your 6'4", 6'5", 240, 250-pound defensive end. He didn't play last week against Wake Forest, but he does have 5 sacks on the season, and he's a guy that generates a lot of quarterback pressures as well. Davis Robinson is a corner to keep an eye on. I'd probably classify him as questionable. He's an LSU transfer, missed the Wake Forest game. He's a key corner in their rotation for them. Tight end Matthew Hibner, I'd classify as questionable too. Huge piece to their blocking and protection schemes for their offense. He's played 401 snaps this year on offense, and he's a guy that, I think he's top 8 in terms of their offensive snap count on the season. Doesn't get a ton of yards in terms of like a pass catching threat, but he is very important to their blocking. They're also just banged up in general on the offensive line, which is something to keep an eye on. Logan Pars, their left guard, he transferred in from Texas a few years ago. He got hurt against Wake Forest. Their left tackle, Savion Byrd, sounds like he's kind of more on track to be able to play, but still something to monitor. He's an Oklahoma transfer who got banged up against Wake Forest. Other members of their offensive line are also clearly kind of playing through stuff. Running back Chris Johnson sounds like he might be on track to be able to play this week against Miami. He's going to want to play against Miami because he is a former Miami player transferred to SMU from Miami. He sustained some sort of lower extremity injury just before halftime at Wake Forest. And then just other guys just are clearly kind of playing through things, I think, Gabby, when you watch SMU's offense in particular. Romello Brinson, to me, looks a little banged up lately. RJ Maryland, their productive tight end, still to me doesn't look like he did pre-injury. He got a bad season-ending knee injury last season, and he's playing this year, but he doesn't quite look as athletic as he did pre-injury. He's wearing a big brace on that leg still. Jordan Hudson got rolled up on pretty bad against Clemson, kind of standing on the sideline, and he's playing through that. And then Rhett Lashley said even their punter, Wade McSparron, is punting with a banged up knee injury. And one of the stories of the Wake Forest game was, field position and how some poor punts really provided Wake Forest with short fields. So SMU's a beat up team, and their injury report that will be released over the next few days will be interesting to monitor. All right, all-time series. SMU leads this all-time series 1-0. So last week, Miami and Stanford, that was the first ever matchup between those programs. This is the second matchup between these programs, Miami and SMU. The Mustangs won that game in 1965 by a score of 7-3 in Miami. SMU this season, they are 5-3 on the year, 3-1 in conference. They suffered their first regular season conference loss this past week at Wake Forest. Again, 13-12. Probably, it is the worst offensive performance of the Rhett Lashley tenure there at SMU is pretty putrid. Also, special teams again was bad. I think you could make the argument that yes, the offense was bad and played a big role in that loss. Special teams might have been the reason why they lost that game, though, because they had 2 punts, I believe, if I remember right, that were shorter than 20 yards, and they also had a missed field goal. They do have wins this year over East Texas A&M, Missouri State, Syracuse, Stanford, and Clemson. They have not beat a Power 4 team with a winning record yet. I believe Missouri State has a winning record. They have losses this year to Baylor, TCU, Wake Forest. Those losses have been determined by a combined 15 points. So kind of the better teams on their schedule, they have lost to. The teams that are kind of struggling this year, they've been able to beat. So that's an interesting dynamic going into this week's game. Head coach Rhett Lashley, of course, is a guy that Miami fans are very familiar with. He was the former offensive coordinator at Miami for 2 years, 2020 and 2021. This is his fourth season as head coach at SMU, and he's done a really nice job going 34-15. He's the play caller for the SMU offense. And, Miami fans are familiar with his attack. He runs an up-tempo offense that spreads defenses out, uh, horizontally at the line of scrimmage, and he will attack vertically as well. And he also pairs that with a inside run game that keeps a defense honest in that area of the field. Kind of similar to like a veer and shoot type of offense, I think. But, uh, you know, once Rhett's offense finds a rhythm, they can be very difficult to contain. If his offense struggles to get that first down of a possession, then it can be a struggle. So just something to keep an eye on there. Their defensive coordinator, Scott Simmons, his background is at linebacker. He was a linebacker, and then he, kind of got his break, I would say, as a coach, as the linebacker coach under Mike Norvell at Memphis in 2018. He then went on to be the Liberty defensive coordinator from 2019 to 2021, and he's been the defensive coordinator at SMU with Rhett ever since they've been there in 2022. He kind of runs the type of defense you would want to see your defensive coordinator run: aggressive, four down front, get up field, generate havoc plays, tackles for loss, sacks, and mixes up coverages on the back end. Willing to play plenty of man, willing to play plenty of cover one with the safety, and they'll throw in some zone there too. But he's doing a good job. SMU stat profile this year: 31 points per game. That's 42nd nationally. 388 yards per game. That's 68th. They pass for 266 yards per game. That's 32nd. Rushing yards 122 per game. That is 106 nationally. 5.8 yards per play. That's 38. 36% on third down. That's 107th. 64% red zone touchdown rate. That's 64th nationally. They allow 6 tackles for loss per game. That's 103rd. They allow 1.63 sacks per game. That's 56. So just overall, just from a stat profile, when you dig into kind of the advanced stats, this offense, I would say it's fair to say they are kind of average from an explosiveness standpoint. They're 96 in the country in those rankings. But in terms of like efficiency and success rate, they're kind of more average to above average. They do a good job of kind of methodically moving the ball rather than being ultra explosive. Last year they were more of an explosive offense. This year they're still trying to kind of find how to do that. Defensively, 21 points per game allowed. That's 42nd. 399 yards per game allowed. That's 98th nationally. 303 passing yards allowed per game. That is 133rd in the country. That's one of the worst in the country. 51st in pass efficiency defense, though. They do a good job of stopping the run. 95 rushing yards per game. That's 15th. 5.1 yards per play. They're top 40 in the country in that. 35% allowed on third down. And they're elite in 2 areas in particular. 38.7% red zone touchdown rate. That's top 10 in the country. That's 7th. And then they do average 3.13 sacks per game. That is also top 10. So overall, SMU's been very good at containing explosive runs. They have, like, their passing numbers are, bad from a counting standpoint, 303 yards per game, but they do a pretty good job, honestly, of not allowing a ton of explosives through the air. They will allow some explosives, but for the most part, it's the methodical passing game that's been giving them issues this year. Special teams, their kicker Sam Keltner is 9 of 13 on the year. Their punter Wade McSparron, 42.2 yards per attempt. He's coming off a inconsistent performance against Wake Forest, but he does have some power and ability as a punter when he is on point. Kick return, really nothing notable for them this year in that phase. Punt return, Ymir Knight is averaging about 9.5 yards per attempt, which is solid, getting essentially a first down per attempt as a punt returner. All right, Gabby, let's talk personnel. Whatever you think you can provide here right now, we'll kind of work through it again. Gabby's playing hurt with uh, what I've diagnosed as laryngitis, but I'm not a doctor. But anyways, Gabby, let's start with Kevin Jennings, right? Their quarterback. It's clear, man, that he is just not who he was last year, and that's because he's banged up. He's playing hurt. He is showing a lot of toughness, I think, playing through this injury. There was times like when he first re-aggravated his ankle thing against Clemson, he's out there limping and he's out there like he can not barely drop back, but it's clear when he's dropping back, he's in pain dropping back. And as that game progressed, whatever happened, whether he took some sort of medication or etc., he got more comfortable and started even making plays outside the pocket a little bit here and there. But in general, he's not himself, but I do think he's still a dangerous quarterback that you got to respect.
He's got a twitched up arm. I mean, he's someone that I think you have to kind of always take account for just because of what he can do when he's kind of ripping it around. I just think he's kind of become like kind of an arm thrower just because of this injury, and I think that that's
Yeah.
kind of made it. I think that's kind of made him a little bit inconsistent and inaccurate at times, just because you kind of need your whole lower half to throw, to step, to pivot, to kind of plant. And I feel like that's where I feel like that's where the struggle is kind of coming from him. What I think you can kind of see, David, you go back to the Clemson game, just the arm talent is kind of absurd. Like he has that long touchdown pass to Jordan
Yeah.
Hudson. That was all arm. I mean, there was no real lower body to it. His feet are kind of all wonky, and he just rips one kind of from like a three-quarters arm slot down the field and just zooms it in there for Jordan Hudson to kind of make a throw. Again, I think there's also times where you see similar in just in the past few games, you see similar things, and it's just like it's not there. It's inaccurate. He's off. But I think he's got a really talented arm. And I think just that gunslinger mentality, I feel like he kind of has. I feel like he can also
Hmm.
kind of put the ball in some dangerous situations too. So I think I'm not sure what the turnover worthy plays, David. You might have that. Um, but to me, he's kind of boomer bust. But his highs are really high, but the lows are also like he can miss his layups, and again, he can kind of try to put the ball in places where maybe it shouldn't go, just trying to force it in there because he trusts his arm so much. So, I've been a Kevin Jennings fan for a while now, David. I mean, as SMU was kind
Yeah.
of coming up last year, I was kind of all on board, but it's clear to me that he's not healthy, and I am curious how much it impacts this Miami game specifically.
Yeah, he is at his best when he's improvising and kind of able to, extend plays, make plays out of the pocket. And he's still somewhat doing that here with this ankle injury, but it's not as effective. And to your point, I agree. Like the accuracy is kind of up and down. He will flash those Kevin Jennings throws that we know he can make when he's healthy, but he also attempts some passes that sail and provide some turnover worthy plays. He has 8 interceptions on the year, and you know, I think it could be more if defenses capitalized on some of
Yep.
those errant
Yeah.
throws.
You look at the
Um,
Baylor game. The Baylor game, first play of the Baylor game, he throws a ball that should have been an easy pick. It just bounces up and it
yeah,
turns into a 73-yard explosive touchdown. But that was easy pick. And I think in the Wake Forest game, he had another one that should have been picked off too.
yeah, yeah. So it's the good and bad of having a gunslinger and having a gunslinger that is hurt. So credit to him for playing through it and trying to get through it. And we'll see. Number one, we'll see if he's a little more healthy this week, because that would certainly help his performance, but also just how he manages things if he is still pretty banged up. It seems like Gabby, when you watch these recent games, like he starts the game fine, looks, kind of like himself, and then once he gets tackled a time or two, that injury gets kind of flared up, and then it's a bit of a experience after that. So we'll see how it goes from there. To kind of preserve your voice here, Gabby, let's just talk all skill players with SMU. And, for me, like, I think coming into this or just watching them, right? It seems like, obviously they're kind of missing a Brashard Smith from last year, who was a big time threat for them in the run and pass game and provided a lot of explosiveness, etc., and allowed Kevin Jennings to, have some better looks off of that run threat. This year, they don't have quite that dynamic threat at running back. They go TJ Harden, who is a UCLA transfer, kind of your solid, steady, big bodied running back, 4.5 to 5 yards per carry type of back. Not the most explosive guy. Lately, they've been trying to get Chris Johnson Jr. going, the Miami transfer, speedy guy, track guy, and he flashes some, but he's also, you know, not necessarily consistently generating explosives. And again, he got banged up against Wake Forest. But Chris Johnson, it is clear, Gabby, they're trying to get him the ball in space, whether that's wide pitches to get him, outside the tackle and beat the defense to the edge. They also use him in the quick passing game, line him up out wide. Clemson did a good job of kind of shutting those downs with cornerbacks coming up and being physical with him. Um, their wide receivers, Romello Brinson, another Miami guy. He's kind of more like he started the season hot, but lately in kind of ACC play, his production has dipped, maybe averaging about 35 yards per game here lately in ACC play. Jordan Hudson flashes some ability as well. Again, we talked about RJ Maryland, their tight end. He is a threat, but he's not, the same dynamic threat to me that he was pre-injury. To me, I guess just one way I see it, Gabby, I think this offensive personnel is not overly explosive. And I think the plan was, okay, we're going to have, Kevin Jennings kind of carry the load for us this year and kind of provide that dynamic playmaking ability as a improviser at quarterback. And now that he's hurt, it kind of hurts that it kind of tapers that ability for him to go carry the load and be the dynamic person for the offense. So that's how I see it, at least. I'm curious what you think about their offensive personnel in general.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it doesn't help that a lot of these guys are kind of banged up, but yeah, it seems like there's that explosive element that's definitely missing. With Chris Johnson Jr. hurt, again, they're trying to get them the ball in a ton of ways, trying to similar ways that we always talked about. If he's going to be productive at Miami, it's about getting him the ball in space, finding open grass for him, and allowing him to run. And they're trying to curate those opportunities for him. But if he's banged up, you take away his top trait, which is that top end speed. So if there's something hindering that, then that limits him. TJ Harden, more of a power back. And then the outside receivers, we had Romello Brinson here. He's an older version of basically what he is. We kind of know what he is. And again, not overly explosive. Jordan Hudson, I think,
Contested catch
has,
guy,
yeah,
right?
Jordan Hudson has more of that like explosive element where he has the potential for it, but he's another one that's kind of banged up too. Yeah, to me, and then RJ Maryland, it's obvious he's not as, fluid and as, and he could still make plays, but he doesn't have that like true explosive element to him anymore either. So I think that this is an offense that's kind of playing with an arm tied behind its back. It's just not at full strength. It's limited in what it can accomplish because of just the availability, the injuries, and all of that stuff. And I think the personnel is good. I think it's ACC solid. I think they have respectable tight ends. I think they have a respectable group of receivers, but I think everything's got to be clicking for this offense to go. And I think right now they're kind of sputtering. It seems like things aren't gelling. It seems like they're out of rhythm. I think it's because of the injuries. I think it's because they're kind of trying to figure out who they are still because you don't have that true kind of explosive go-to guy. And I think it kind of shows on tape that they're kind of searching for answers with Kevin Jennings not being able to be the guy. So I'm with you on the offensive personnel, but I do think that there is talent here.
Yeah, yeah. There's good enough talent, and we'll get into it later, what I think about their offense in general. What scares me the most about their offense. Let's go line of scrimmage real quick. Offensive line. in terms of like PFF, they grade out quite well with pass protection. Um, and look, I think you look at them, they definitely have the body types. They look the part as a power four offensive line. They got the big long tackles, and a lot of their offensive line is bounce backs from, higher level traditional
Right.
power four programs like in Oklahoma, a
Mhm.
Texas, even Zion
Arkansas.
Nelson's there, Arkansas.
Yep.
So in general, what stands out to you about their offensive line?
Yeah, for me, it's just the size, right? Like these are all body types that were attractive to these big time programs. I think Logan
Yeah.
Parr signed with Texas. Like he looks the part. Joshua Bates is a center out of Oklahoma. He was a pretty coveted transfer center this offseason. He was from Oklahoma. They got Chamblee, who was a starter at Arkansas, I believe, at some point. Addison Nichols, I think, was a starter at Arkansas. You got Zion Nelson, who's kind of rotating in. He's like my age, and he, was a 3-year starter for Miami. So he's a guy that's played a lot of football. That's trying to kind of get back into it, and he's playing for them. So a lot of guys that, from like height, weight, body type standpoint, look the part. And so I think for SMU, I think that was the right approach as far as just going out and getting those types of guys. Now, I think are there's a reason also why they didn't stick at those schools, but they're still big body types who have kind of settled in as they've grown older. They're older guys, physically mature guys that have something to them. So I think they've done a pretty respectable job for SMU up front. Again, Kevin Jennings is an improv guy, so he can extend things and things like that. But I think as he's gotten hurt, I think you've kind of seen it maybe kind of get on top of him a little bit more as far as just some of the pressure and stuff that they kind of generate.
Yeah, good solid group. Um, let's flip it to the defense, and I think as it relates with SMU, you got to start with what they have up front. And in my opinion, Gabby, they have, like, when I watch SMU, to me they got five good defensive linemen. Again, Robertson. We'll see what his availability is, but when he's healthy, good to go. He's their best defensive lineman. They got Isaiah Smith, 11 tackles for loss on the year. Terry Webb, defensive tackle, 5.5 sacks. Very disruptive on the interior. Jeffrey Emba, 5 sacks. Very disruptive on the interior. And one guy who they're starting to kind of rotate in more and more that catches my attention is DJ Warner. He's kind of a speed guy off the edge. These are guys that get a lot of sacks, a lot of tackles for loss. They've also forced 4 fumbles on the year too, so they do a good job of, getting to the quarterback and forcing those fumbles. So, I think it's one of the better defensive lines Miami's played this year. And this is, from an SMU standpoint, this is one battle that I would assume they feel like they need to win.
Yep.
Their D line. I don't know if, I mean, they probably do need to go win the battle of Miami's
Yep.
offensive line.
Yeah, for SMU, they need to win this matchup for sure because I think a big part of, SMU, if they're going to win this game or make it tight, it's going to be rattling up Carson Beck and forcing him to kind of make some mistakes. And obviously, pressure can do that. It's to me, this is I really like this defensive line. Cameron
Hmm.
Robinson's playing really good football. Isaiah Smith's playing really good football. DJ Warner, the former top 100 recruit who signed with Kansas, it didn't really click for him there. He transferred to SMU, and it's you're starting to kind of see the flashes. David, I think one thing that stood out to me. I mean, you talk about Webb on the inside. I think he's a total baller. I think he's a really good player. They found a gem
Same.
in Webb. He's a really good player. Jeffrey Emba
He
is a guy
is.
who was at one point the number one ranked junior college player in the country. I think he signed with Auburn, then went to Purdue, and now at SMU. But he was heavily recruited that last year of the Manny Diaz era at Miami. So this staff was. At least the offensive staff was pretty familiar with Jeffrey Emba. They were able to get him over here. David, another thing that I noticed, David, just when kind of looking over SMU, they play four interior defensive linemen that are at least 6'3", 310 pounds. So they have
Yeah,
some big boys on this
they do.
interior defensive line. Like this is a defensive line that looks the part to me. I think those guys have been producing. They kind of get after it. I think that this is a unique challenge for them, just because this Miami offensive line has been really good. But I think that this group is going to give Miami some problems. And this group is battle tested, but I don't think Alex Mirabal and Mario Cristobal are gonna have any trouble kind of getting these guys up for this game because these dudes kind of get after it, and those interior guys are a problem. So especially with the way Miami, as we heard Shannon Dawson say, like they're gonna run the ball up the middle. I mean, those A's and B's gaps, that's where the ball kind of spits out to. So if we're gonna do that, I mean, you got to be prepared to block some of those big boys. So I think there's going to be a lot on the plate of James Brockermeyer to kind of start bouncing back in this one in his home state of Texas on Matthew McCoy and Samson Okunlola and Inez Cooper. I think it's going to be huge for those guys to play excellent football in this game because I really like those interior bodies. They're big boys. They can move. They can get after it. And then those edge rushers are, they got like three of them that are respectable, and Cam Robinson, Isaiah Smith, and DJ Warner. So it's going to be a challenging matchup. I think more challenging of a matchup up front than I think maybe most people would expect.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the key matchups of the game. How about their back seven, Gabby? Because to me, you watch them and it's kind of up and down.
Hmm.
You know, particularly like I don't know, their linebackers to me are just kind of guys. I think their secondary at times can flash some talent, and then at times there's lapses in assignment, and also just maybe the talent isn't quite there at times too. But what stands out to you about their back seven?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think linebackers are pretty limited. I think Alex Kilgore is kind of like their guy at linebacker. He's like their captain. He's the guy that again I think he's one of like their leaders. But again I think he's a pretty limited, especially in coverage situations. I think he's kind of suspect. Justin Medlock plays some blast from the past. Justin Medlock, former Miami commit to again that Manny Diaz staff before he flipped late to Utah, eventually landed at SMU. So one of many connections at SMU. With previous Miami ties. He's a guy that kind of plays for them a little bit on the back end. Again, I think it's similar where these are, it's a bunch of former kind of power four guys, at least at cornerback. You got Deuce Harmon, who I believe started his career at Texas A&M, right? Marcellus Barnes
Hmm.
was at Syracuse, I believe, a year ago. He's got, though both those guys have length. Some of the, reserve cornerbacks I think are kind of gettable. You got Ahmad Moses, who kind of, I feel like is a good, like, kind of downhill player. I think in coverage
Hmm.
again, he can be kind of suspect, but he's
Up and
aggressive and
down.
yeah, he's a good north south kind of safety. Wacobia I think is kind of similar where he can kind of give you some more as he kind of gets plays a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. He plays in the slot some too, right? So like maybe he's someone that could
Mm.
maybe match up a little bit against Malachi Tony. Him and it seems like a couple different guys take on the that responsibility, but older guys. Wacobia is one of the better safeties in the ACC. At least that's like kind of the perception. But I think that there's going to be opportunity here on the outside. You got to win your matchups. I think it's going to be it's another test for Miami's third outside receiver or third pass catcher to see if they can kind of capitalize on opportunity. I think they'll be tested, but I think that it's a matchup that Miami has an opportunity to win for sure.
Yeah, to me, like Isaiah Wacobia to me is their best player in the secondary. He shows some playmaking instincts, leads the team in tackles, 65 tackles so far this year. He has 2 picks, 7 passes defended, so he is around the ball. But I do think you can also, use his aggressiveness against him at times. So, um, yeah, again, Miami's teams. A lot of these teams are attacking SMU through the air this year. I think that speaks to their ability, what they have up front to stop the run. And, look, I think SMU's pass rush is good, but if you can block them up, there's going to
Mhm.
be opportunities downfield.
Yeah,
So
I got a good little string of stats for you here, David.
good.
This is how wide receivers against SMU this season, right? This is just across the board. So as receivers just from the FCS to basically everything they've played. I don't think there hasn't been a receiver. There's been one receiver, one team that hasn't generated a receiver that has caught for at least 80 yards. Every single one of them except one has a touchdown. So East Texas A&M top receiver, 4 catches, 87 yards. Baylor had a 9 catch, 151 yard, 2 touchdown performance. Also had a receiver catch 10 passes for 145 yards. Baylor also had a 4 catch, 63 yard, 2 touchdown receiver. So Baylor aired it out all over SMU. Missouri State, 5 catches, 80 yards and a touchdown from their top receiver. TCU, 8 catches, 254 yards and 3 touchdowns against SMU. Their top receiver, Eric McAllister, had a day. Jonte Cook at Syracuse had 7 catches, 82 yards and a touchdown. CJ Williams at Stanford had 7 catches for 109 yards and a touchdown. TJ Moore at Clemson had 5 catches for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I think it's going to be a big day for, a guy like CJ Daniels potentially to go and perform in an opportunity where, again, if you limit that pass rush, you can throw it on these guys, but it's you got to handle that first. But this secondary is definitely gettable.
Yes, I agree. So it'll be an interesting thing to monitor. Let's take a break, and then on the other side, we'll get into this matchup from a Miami standpoint. All right, we are back. Um, so Gabby, just some things we want to see from Miami in this SMU game. You already touched on how they do match up well in terms of, or there's going to be opportunities in the passing game potentially. And that kind of dovetails into one of the points. This is like a big picture point, and like if Miami's going to get to where we think they could potentially get to with, maximizing their potential and making a run in the first to the CFP, and then if they get to the CFP, making a run in the CFP. To me, man, like this offense needs to unlock some explosiveness on offense. And um, it was interesting to me that the conversation from the fan base and the questions from the media coming off the Stanford game. And look, I don't have an issue with any of these conversations or any of these questions, but it was all about the inside run game against Stanford. But like, Miami's run game worked in that game. Miami ran for 199 and Mark Fletcher ran for 106 and 3 touchdowns. That's a successful day. However, you want to slice it up, whether, just because they don't necessarily like, or if you don't like inside run, that's still producing though, right? So I don't know. My issue, what I think is the more important and more interesting conversation is how are you going to unlock some explosiveness in the passing game? Because Miami's performance, again, we talk about how SMU is allowing a bunch of teams to throw for 300 yards. Stanford was the same thing this time last week. Every team essentially Stanford faced to that point had thrown for 300 yards against Stanford. Miami threw for what I believe less, or Carson Beck threw for less than 200, right? So uh, they need to get that going if they aspire to really be one of those teams that can compete for a college football playoff spot. You look at last week's game, 2 plays that went for at least 20 yards, a 32-yard pass and a 22-yard pass. Stanford, whose offense wasn't all that explosive last week either, uh, also had two 20-yard gains in that game. So there was only 3 downfield passing attempts against Stanford. And look, is this team ever going to really be like an ultra explosive downfield operation? Probably not. Um, but to me, like what Miami needs to lean in on is something they've shown. Carson Beck has shown he's good at, and that's essentially he's very efficient in the play action game, whether that's RPOs or just straight up play action. He's completing 80.6% of his attempts in play action for 700 yards, 5 touchdowns against 1 interceptions. And the explosive number here is he's averaging 10.5 yards per attempt during these play action looks. They're running play action on 31% of his dropbacks To me, that number needs to creep up closer to that 50% range. Again, this includes RPO looks. Um, and also too, like I think it's time to start kind of tweaking the personnel snap counts a little bit to maybe get some more explosive potential on the field as well. We saw Tony Johnson get an uptick in snaps and he came through. I think we need to see a little bit more of Josh Moore, a little bit more of JoJo Trader and Tony Johnson at receiver, less Alex Bauman and Elijah Lofton on the field together. Like I understand you gotta have one tight end on the field to kind of make this thing go. But when you have 12 personnel out there, to me, you're kind of fighting with one arm behind your back. It's limiting your explosive potential. Also, too, like I think it's time. Like Jordan Lyle got hurt game one. Marty Brown stepped in and admirably did a great job. With a role that was bigger than maybe expected through those 3 or 4 games. But I think now that Jordan Lyle's healthy, it's time to you know have Jordan Lyle and Mark Fletcher be the clear cut top two running backs and try to get some little more explosiveness in the run game with getting Jordan Lyle going. But again, to me, the real conversation is about the passing game. Can it get more explosive? Does this staff trust Carson Beck after that 4 interception game against Louisville? Because I think that's part of what we saw last week too against Stanford, where they were just kind of protected the ball because they knew they could beat Stanford that way and get out of there with the win. Um, you know, you can't. I don't think you can run the table here with these remaining, what is it, 4 or 5 games playing that way. So, and you look at the numbers too. Miami is averaging 5.7 yards per play against FBS opponents. So take that, Bethune game out of the equation. 5.7 yards per play, and that's 46th in the country. I think, Miami fans that are optimistic that this team can still legitimately compete for a championship would tell you there's 2 teams here in recent years that, maybe weren't the most explosive, but still found a way to go compete for the national championship. And in one of these cases, win the national championship. But last year's Notre Dame team, not the most explosive offense, but they did average 6.2 yards per play, which was 18th in the country. And then that 2023 Michigan offense averaged 6.1 yards per play, which was 24th in the country. So uh, you still have to have that, a top 25 explosive type of offense in the country. Miami has some work to do to get up to that point. I think they have the personnel to do it. I, to get to that top 25, creep back in there. But to me, they got to trust Carson Beck to go do it. Carson, of course, has to do his part and protect the football. And then, I do think it's time to start slowly working in some of these younger players with some explosive potential. So, but that's one thing, just big picture wise. And then, of course, SMU on paper provides explosive opportunities to a passing attack. And so it needs to show up. I wanted to see it against Stanford. We didn't see it. So now it's like, okay, we really got to see it this week against SMU for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I kind of went the opposite way on it. I was just like, I'm just like find a way to win. And you're right. Obviously there needs to be an explosive element in the passing game, but like to win this game, I just think it's just about keeping the ball, making the smart decisions and owning the clock. And that doesn't mean that you can't be explosive while doing those things. That doesn't mean
Right.
you can't kind of because kind of what I wrote was game manager approach from Carson Beck. You could take a game manager approach and still create explosive plays because that could be on the playmakers to go make the plays. I think just for Carson Beck, I think there's a fine line between just like forcing explosives or forcing the offense
Yes.
to be explosive when it's not, which I think was a part of the issue in that Louisville game where you were kind of forcing balls
Correct.
into situations where it's like receiver has to make an extraordinary play to
Correct.
be explosive versus kind of letting things kind of happen and then finding the explosive shots and completing those. And I think that's maybe more of like the
Hmm.
FSU side of it, right? Where Malika, they kind of drew up an explosive look. It was there, you took it and you hit it. Same thing with CJ Daniels on that deep post where he kind of had like a 40 something yard gain. So I think it's just more of that approach of just making sure you're
Yep.
not being overly aggressive trying to make something happen and rather just letting the explosive plays and I think it just comes to just the baseline of Carson Beck just needing to kind of stay, you know, just kind of leave the cape, like, no cape. You got to just go play football, see what's there, take what's in front of you. And when those opportunities come up, you take them and not force those opportunities. So I think that this is a turnover hungry type of defense. I think in this game, especially, they're going
Yes.
to feel like they need to take the ball away. So I think they're going to be extra aggressive because they know those are the margins where they need to win. And so I think it's going to be essential for Carson Beck to just kind of stay in that zone of just like protect the football, make good reads, run the football. Like people don't want to hear that, but Miami needs to run the football effectively. And then when those shots are there, which I think we showed they can be because other people have unlocked explosive elements from their passing games against this SMU defense, specifically against this SMU secondary. When those opportunities become available, you take them. So, um, that's kind of what that's where I was at in the Carson Beck kind of approach, where I think both things are true. You got to be explosive, but you can't force those explosive plays and put the ball in danger.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. And look, there does have to be a balance, right? I think because you look at it, like you do have to have a top 25 explosive offense in the country. Like that's what championship level teams do. But also, those teams have quarterbacks that really don't throw more than 10 picks in a season. And right now, Carson Beck's sitting at 7. So he really has to do a good job moving forward of protecting the football, um, and finding a way to still be explosive. And yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating for a downfield passing attack. I don't think they really have that. What I am advocating for is kind of working more the play action looks. And of course, to do that, you gotta be patient with your run game, etc. So, and to me, Gabby, like I don't know if you agree with this. I don't know if I would necessarily go extreme and say like it looked like they were neutering Carson Beck against Stanford, but it did seem like just an overly cautious approach. And that's kind of what I am advocating that they not do moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it was definitely more limited in, in the Stanford game as far as just the general passing approach. I'm with you. It can't be that. It can't be that, but it can't be Louisville. There's a sweet spot in the middle, and they've
Correct.
been that. I think before that Louisville game, I think they were that. Like that was I think it's kind of just getting back into
Yeah.
that identity that they were at before because before that it wasn't it wasn't the it wasn't the crazy, string of turnovers, but there was also had some mistakes, obviously.
Yeah.
But you got to find that sweet spot, and I think we've seen the sweet spot already. It's just about kind of getting back into that, and then I think just unlocking another explosive element out of that, because I think that that's still something that's kind of missing from it. So it's there. I think it's there. I think maybe you needed a game to kind of just hit the pause button and maybe just kind of get everyone settled back in. I think they probably know you can't play that way in these types of games because you're just handcuffing your quarterback and you don't want to do that either. So I think there's a part where you kind of have to let Carson Beck be Carson Beck, but you also have to just have him know where the limitations are and where the guardrails are. And I think I'm optimistic that that's there in a game like this.
Yeah. So other points, just quickly, I'll run through them. You know, we talked about SMU's defensive line, but like Miami's offensive line, one of the best in the country, if not the best. It's certainly in that conversation. But you cannot let SMU's defensive line impact the game. And look, I expect Miami's offensive line to win this matchup during the overall course of the game, but there's going to be times that SMU's defensive line has opportunities to make impact plays, whether that's a third and short run stop, a sack in an obvious passing situation, Carson Beck needs to make good decisions when he is pressured by this defensive line. Checkdowns are okay. Sometimes eating a sack is okay. You can't let this SMU defensive line control the flow of Miami's offense. We'll see if Cam Robertson's good to go. And look, maybe this is hot takey, Gabby. I'm curious what you would think about this. I think you could make the argument, and I probably would make the argument that this is the best pure pass rushing defensive line Miami has faced this season. And frankly, it might be the best defensive line Miami's faced this season because you go back to Notre Dame, their defensive tackles just weren't good enough. The Florida game, they were missing what? George Gums, they were missing LJ McCray, they were missing Boudreaux, they were missing Caleb Banks.
Caleb Banks, yeah.
So they were kind of missing a bunch of guys. Florida State's D line is not very good. Louisville was, you know, Clev Lubin made some plays
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
in that matchup. So,
Renee Conga
uh,
made some plays on that
right,
big late interception.
right. So now, three of those four interceptions by Carson in that game, he was not pressured. So,
Hmm.
but to me, I don't know. Do you agree? Like to me, this is the best defensive line Miami's faced.
I think this is a really good defensive line. Yeah, like I think people are sleeping on how good this defensive line is. Um, Yeah, I think there were limitations with all those defensive lines. Again, not super premium pass rushers at Notre Dame, Florida, Florida State. Louisville's defensive line played really well.
Yeah.
But I think this SMU defensive line is deeper. I think it's probably, in general, more talented along the edges, especially if Cam Robertson plays. Um, I really like some of these guys that they got, man. And those interior
Yeah.
bodies are big. They got big boys on the interior. Like this defensive line is going to look the part, and you've played some big brands nationally, but SMU's done a good job of stacking some bodies. Like SMU's kind of been an offensive team, but they've gone heavy into trying to invest in this defense. And I think up front, it's a respectable defense. I mean, they played really well against Wake Forest. Like they were disruptive. They were good. They were really good against Clemson at times too, and they were playing a backup quarterback. But still, like there were times that it made that they were. But I think the thing about this defense is when they don't get home, I think what's behind them is still kind of suspect.
Yes.
So I think a lot kind of gets put on that defensive line's plate because they can impact the game in a big way, but when they don't, it's a pretty, it's a defense that's
It's
easy to
kind of
beat.
like Miami last year. Like Miami's D line was expected to cover up issues in the back
Right,
last year, and it couldn't. But SMU's D line does have some dudes, and I'm
for sure.
saying like in a situation they're gonna have a chance to make a big play.
For sure.
You can't let them then make
Yeah.
that play, and then the game they get the moment that the
Yeah.
Terry Webb guy
He's a
is
baller.
nasty.
He's a baller. I don't know where they found him. I think it was like Texas State or something, right? And then junior college or something. Or junior
Ball
college,
State,
Texas
I
State or
don't
Ball
know.
State. Yeah, I don't know where this kid came from, but he's a dancing bear in there. Like he's super athletic.
He's
He does a really good job,
he's
man.
angry too. Like he's always hitting
Yeah.
himself on the head after big
He's
plays,
a
and
dude. Like
yeah,
I mean Jeffrey Emba's just a big body too. Like he can kind of get
yep,
after it. And they have some rotational guys that they throw in there. Those guys are big too and they get after it. Like they're a load to deal with. But Webb to me, when I'm watching them, like Webb was always the guy where I'm just like, man, this number 4 can play. Like he's a good player.
yep,
And look, people kind of know how to, people Miami's offensive identity is not a secret. Like they've told you openly what they want to do. They're like everyone knows. So they know you're gonna run it on them, and like you're gonna have to beat their guys, which is what I was talking about earlier. Like you're gonna have to win a physical matchup in the trenches. And so like you gotta step up and you gotta play against this defensive line because they're gonna get after you. Like they're going to.
right. So the other points I got win the turnover battle and red zone battles. That's because that's where SMU is elite in these two categories. They lead the country in 20 turnovers forced. Um, and so, you know, Miami's the better team. One way that teams that are lesser than Miami can go win a game is forcing turnovers. That's what Louisville did. and they won the game by 3 points. Now SMU on their offense also turns the ball over quite a bit, so the turnover battle will be interesting to monitor. And then also SMU is very good at preventing red zone touchdowns. When opponents they've made 31 trips inside the red zone this season. SMU's allowed only 8 touchdowns on those 31 trips. Again, that's seventh best in the country. Um, and look, I think Miami, you know, they got to, from their defensive side of things, Rhett Lashley is very good at being creative down there and finding edges. So eye discipline's gonna be important down there in the red zone from a Miami defensive perspective. And just the last big picture point I have, Gabby, handle November, right? This game's gonna be played on November 1st. So
Yep.
it's now the critical part of the season. Going back to the preseason pod, I feel like all off season, the point we hammered, we overemphasized. Number one, Miami's got to go 7-1 in the ACC schedule. We'll see if they can do that. They got to run the table to do that. Number two, you got to handle business in November. Miami, you know, is viewed as a team that sputters in November. That's something that predates Mario Cristobal. And so that's one of the things he has to change as head coach at Miami. Hasn't quite got there yet. So we'll see if Miami can handle business in November. Again, starts here against SMU, tricky road game. But you got to handle business in November. Anything else you want to add, big picture wise or whatever, for this game that you want to see from Miami?
Yeah, two quick things. I think one is kind of making SMU methodical. We talked about how they want. I think this is a kind of a big explosive play reliant offense. I think down to down they kind of struggle, and they've been kind of sputtering early in games. Like they're not, everyone's worried about like, oh, the Jeff Brom opening script crushed Miami. The Rhett Lashley opening script is coming. Like SMU's opening script hasn't been that good. Like it hasn't been like lethal where they're like driving the field down on teams, and it's like so. I think Miami needs to kind of force
Here's the
SMU
thing
to
I
cut.
would bring up because I think it's fair. Like, everyone is worried about the boogeyman Jeff Brom and how he schemed up Miami or he schemed up Louisville to that win, right? I think all that's true and fair. Jeff Brom absolutely impacted that game and is why they won. But I think you also got to recognize personnel. And
Right.
is there a Chris
No.
Bell on SMU? Is there an Isaac Brown on SMU?
No.
Right.
Right. No, and that's why it's just like I think you kind of start when just getting them stopped early, like just kind of setting the tone early. I think because we talked about it. Once this Miami defense settles in, it's like this once this defense settles in, like they're good. Like
Yeah.
like you don't got to worry. Like once they settle in, you kind of don't have to worry about it anymore. So I think just kind of setting the tone early where maybe it's Miami's a team that starts fast. Like Miami's kind of been sputtering out of the gate a little bit. Obviously struggled for a half against Stanford and got rolling. Got down quick 14 against Louisville and had to kind of claw their way back. Never really do that. Um, so I think it's important for Miami to kind of just set the tone early, get a nice early stop on SMU. I think if they win the toss, they take the ball. I'm pretty sure. So if in a situation where SMU gets the ball first and wants the ball, like you got to kind of respond because they've been struggling. So I don't want to see SMU kind of figure it out early in the game when they haven't really been figuring it out early in the game against against some of these past most recent opponents. So I think just kind of setting the tone and then just making them be a down to down team. I think against Wake Forest they had 17 drives and they scored 12 points. So, again, I think that kind of shows that kind of, and that was a uniquely
It's an
terrible
outlier
performance.
though.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
uniquely terrible performance by them. But still, I think just there's questions that they need to figure out. I think they're also trying to figure out a lot right now of what does this offense look like with a hindered Kevin Jennings and some other injuries that you're kind of navigating too. Injuries to the offensive line, injuries to a guy like Chris Johnson and some other personnel that's not playing 100%. So I think it's just going to be important for Miami to kind of set the tone in this game and kind of be the aggressors. And
Yeah.
then, once the defense settles in, I'm not really super worried about it.
Yeah. And there's that road game element too, right?
Right.
Take the crowd out early.
Mhm.
You're probably in good shape. Anything
Right.
else you want to touch on?
No, that's it for me.
Okay. How about a matchup we like the most? For me, like I'm gonna go just Miami's passing game against the
Mm,
SMU defense.
I did the same.
Specifically just okay. Specifically just Carson Beck and the pass catchers against the SMU back seven. Um, you know, as we've talked about here, I think there's going to be opportunities there. Again, I was disappointed Miami didn't throw for more yards against Stanford. I understood their approach to just go win the game the way they did, but I would feel not that I'm not confident in Miami this week, but I would feel a lot better about this team right now in general if Carson went out and threw for 270 plus against Stanford last week. So,
Yeah.
uh, but SMU does have a good pass rush. If Miami is able to block it up consistently, there's going to be opportunities.
I'm with you. I think that's the big advantage, but again, it's about Miami capitalizing on that advantage and Carson Beck capitalizing on that advantage by, kind of delivering the ball and getting the ball to these guys. It's obviously on the offensive line to block it up, but I think that that's an area where Miami could separate in this game.
How about a matchup to keep an eye on? Again, to me, it's like the SMU D line impacting the game. I think they're very good. If SMU, to me, if SMU wins this game, I think it's because that SMU defensive line wins that wins that battle. And it's probably like to me, Gabby, I think SMU kind of needs this to be a low scoring game, like a game almost like the Louisville type of score, like a 24-21, 24-20. That's how I think this SMU team wins that game. I don't know if they can be overly explosive against this Miami defense. But if their defensive line, makes the UM offense sputter, I think it's going to be one of those tight games, tough to watch games from a Miami standpoint.
Yeah, and I think just the explosive element part, I think Miami kind of made tweaks to the personnel on defense too to kind of account for that. Like we saw more Ethan O'Connor, less OJ Frederic, and OJ Frederic was kind of who got burned by CJ by Chris
Chris Bell.
Bell. So yeah, I think they've kind of made their tweaks as far as just being from that explosive standpoint, and it was cleaned up. Like CJ Williams was like a non-factor in the Stanford game, and he had been great, coming up to that point. And I thought Ethan O'Connor played a really good game. Matchup that worries me, just obviously what you said, David, and I think just the turnover nature of SMU's defense. You talk about them leading the nation in turnovers, and Carson Beck being a quarterback that when the turnovers come, they tend to come in bunches. And so if we kind of start, seeing, or if there's an early turnover, or there's an early situation where they force a turnover, an interception, or there's an errant throw, I'm concerned that that piles up. And that's something that ultimately makes it difficult for Miami to play a complete game. Just kind of puts their backs against the wall on the road. Their homecoming, selling out their 32,000 seat venue there in Dallas. Um, so I think the turnover factor is something that has me a little bit uneasy just because of who Carson Beck's been, which is why I think I kind of landed on that game managery type of approach. Um, just because I think taking care of the football and holding on to it is so important. Miami's a time of possession team. SMU's not really a time of possession team. So I think that holding on to the football, maintaining possession, I think limits just SMU and what they want to be on offense. So I think the turnover factor and what they do on the back end, concerns me.
How about a player that needs to step up for Miami? Where are you going here?
Carson Beck. For me, it's Carson Beck. I think that this is going to be an interesting challenge game for him, just because of all the reasons that I just listed. I think that Carson Beck's the guy I'm looking at to just help Miami just win this game because this is a big one you got to win. This is a playoff, like, kind of all these ACC games are playoff games. Like, this is a playoff game. Because after this game, you have three opponents that theoretically you should handle. Not really going to be a ton of questions. This SMU game is a huge remaining test on the schedule. So I think that I think Carson Beck having a clean, efficient game, finding a way to win, whatever that looks like, is big. And I think a lot of that's going to fall on Carson Beck's performance on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll go on the defensive side. I'll highlight Zechariah Poyser just because, I think he's had some up and down performances in general this season. I think some weeks he looks great. I think against like Florida State, to me, he looked really good. And then since then, it's kind of been up and down a little bit. I think Rhett Lashley, his offense puts a lot of pressure on safeties to play well in space and keep everything in front of them. Rhett Lashley will also present a lot of eye candy. He will also present a lot of looks in which they overload a spot on the field, and the safety needs to go make the right decision on who to go cover, etc. So I'm going to highlight Zechariah Poyser because, his tackling in space and his coverage is going to play a critical role in whether or not Miami can consistently contain the explosive potential of this SMU attack. Potential player of the game. Where are you going here?
I'm going with my guy Malachi Tony. I think that this could be I think they're going to struggle to cover him. I think that he's a bad matchup for SMU. Um, so
Hmm.
I think that he could feast in this game. So, and I think he could be an outlet for Carson Beck, in a lot of different ways. And I think his confidence is just building and building. I think Miami's confidence in him is just building and building. And I think that this could be a nice opportunity for him to have a huge game on the road in a different environment. We saw it at FSU. He had a huge game on the road at FSU, kind of met that moment and was a huge difference maker. I think we could see something similar for Malachi Tony against SMU as, so we're looking for someone to step up. I think he could be a great security blanket and playmaker for Miami in this one.
Yeah, he's obviously the best player on offense. He's where I would go to. He makes this offense go, gets everything going, and I would expect him to have a big game against SMU as well. All right, time for prediction. Of course, let's talk about the lines, the betting lines. Miami's a 12.5 point favorite. Last I looked here on FanDuel, over under is 50.5. Gabby, floor is yours. Where do you want to go with predicting this game?
Yeah, I'm still. I think that this game is. I think this is an interesting game because I can see a number of different potential outcomes. I think ultimately that this is a huge point, a huge spot on the schedule for both teams. SMU's technically still alive in the ACC title race, even after losing to Wake Forest. So this is kind of like a stay alive game for them. For Miami, there's implications beyond the ACC as far as just staying in the college football playoff picture and staying in the ACC conference picture. So I think that this is a huge game for both sides. I think it's going to be highly competitive. I expect a bounce back performance to some extent from SMU on offense. I'm curious just how limited they are, if they have answers with the way their offense is kind of structured right now. How healthy is Kevin Jennings? And what's it going to look like in this game? But I think that Miami is in a spot where kind of got to win. I think they will win. I think it's going to be like 1-2 score game. Like, I don't know, the line's it's 10, 10.5. I think that that's about where I'm at. I think this is going to be I got like 28-17 type of game. Maybe Miami scores late to kind of push it, but I think that this could be a tight one. That's about where I'm sitting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think this is a game where Miami can cover the spread, but I just have to see it. And to me,
Mhm.
that kind of comes down to like how much do the coaches trust Carson Beck to throw it, and how does Carson Beck execute? Especially with like you've alluded to a lot, limiting the turnovers in this game, and really like the only thing that kind of worries me about SMU's offense is Rhett Lashley dialing something wide open, right? And I think Kevin Jennings being banged up is a significant factor in this game. Their skill guys to me are fine, but not, again, it's not Chris Bell, it's not Isaac Brown. Um, I think Miami's defense, right? They play fast, and I think Rhett knows that obviously, and he's going to have some things in his bag where he uses that aggressiveness against Miami. So To me, eye discipline's huge in this game from a defensive perspective. I think the SMU defense has the potential to keep this thing close, especially if Miami's sloppy with the penalties and turnovers. Uh, just negative plays in general, sacks, tackles for loss. And I do think from an offensive standpoint with Miami, like there's going to be an effort to open things up a little bit compared to the Stanford game. Um, but let's see how it goes. I think it's important to get some early confidence, early momentum as it relates to the offense and showing a little bit of explosiveness here. Because again, I said this in the instant reaction podcast. It just seems like the offense plays tight until they get going. So in recent weeks. So hopefully Miami can start fast on offense and that will allow them to play free and explosive. And hopefully they get some guys going. Those guys I highlighted earlier, like a Jordan Lyle at running back. And then, one of the trio of JoJo, Josh Moore, Tony Johnson, like get them some opportunities to show what they can do in space and et cetera. So it's a big game. I think it's kind of one of those barometer type games where it's like, okay, I think we're really gonna know, like, is Miami about this year? Like, are they able to actually be a team that can run the table for the rest of the season? Or are they gonna be a team that like kind of barely escapes and is like week to week? We'll see if they can actually handle business, and it's probably a matter of time before they get popped and lose one more. So it's going to be kind of one of those indicator games, and we'll see how it goes. So we'll get out of here on that note. Did I say my score? 31-23 is what I said, or what I'm going with anyway. So um, get out of here on that note. Appreciate everyone for listening. Appreciate Gabby for fighting through this pod um, with the laryngitis. I gave him the option to not do it. He wanted to fight through. So appreciate for him for doing that. And again, go subscribe insidetheu.com right now. Like it's recruiting season and it's picking up. Gabby's all over it. And it's a lot of fun to follow right now. See who else Miami can flip here or add during the stretch. So uh, we'll have our next podcast immediately following the SMU game. And until next time, take care.